I wouldn't eat it, but fine.
Peer advantage. All
Fine.
right. We are probably going to do one session. I'm going to let you out early, unless you guys have a zillion questions. But one of the things I was asked to cover, since I didn't even get to money laundering during the money laundering part, I just did bribing and smuggling money. I'm going to give you a few minutes on money laundering before getting to the main part of the lecture. I mean, I need to define money laundering. So let's start. Money laundering is how you take dirty money, money earned in illegal ways, and transport it into money you can actually spend for stuff you might want. Cars, homes, investments, etc. Typically, when you look into this, you're told there are three stages to money laundering. The first is just getting it into the financial system. Now, depending on how the illegal proceeds are earned, that can be harder or easier. Traditionally, most people think of the money you laundered as cash. Cash is increasingly problematic. As I explained, even unmarked cash has a serial number, and those serial numbers are digitized. And even unmarked cash has strips of metal in it. The metal detectors can find it, and drug sniffing dogs can find it. And so cash is a real problem. But literally, if you're running a major drug enterprise or a major prostitution enterprise, or you want to pay people, bribe people, and honestly, so cash becomes a real problem. So you got to place it into the system. That is getting harder and harder to do in many countries, particularly, let's say, the G7. Then the next step is layering. So we got to camouflage the fact that, gee, this is money from that's earned illegally. And then finally, you want to withdraw it, and then you're happy because you can be a happy drug lord off your thing by politicians. Thank you. So how does this work? How do you place stuff? Well, some people think, oh, well, banks don't have to report cash transactions below a certain threshold, so I'll just structure it so that instead of depositing 20,000 pounds at once, I'll break it up into smaller pieces. Okay, you can do that. Now, if you walk into the same bank every day with 9,000 pounds, they're going to ask questions. So you tend to use money mules and people like that. The other problem with that technique is, in most countries, the act of even doing that is a crime. So you can't say, oh, I'm going to stage my deposits in a way that won't attract attention. But you could walk in to, now it depends on the country, but in many places you can still buy pretty expensive stuff for cash. So one technique, very simple laundering technique, is you walk into a travel agent in a bad neighborhood that looks like it doesn't do very much business. And you say, hi, my eccentric old granny, she's 95. And for her 96th birthday, she has decided she wants to take all of her 27 children to Disneyland. Can you believe it? And she's kind of an eccentric old lady, so she's kept all her savings in cash. So I have here 50,000 pounds in a shopping bag. They're granny's savings. I would like to buy 25 tickets to Disneyland. Yay, flying first class. You buy a really expensive holiday. And then, of course, travel agents a little like, yeah, but they're making money selling these expensive Disneyland packages, so they'll probably take the money. And it's now their problem. What the hell do they do with 50,000 pounds cash? How do you get your money back? You call them up in a week and you say, I'm so sorry. Granny just passed away. We're not able to go on the holiday. Could we please have a refund? And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, there's a 7% fee. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Where should I send the check? And they send you a check for 93% of your original money, and it's nice and clean because it's just a check from a business, a legitimate business. So, wow, money clean. So there are retail techniques like that. There is a sheet of paper going around that is simply columns, room for your name and surname. And that will really help me because that's my indication that you guys showed up on Friday afternoon. So if you haven't gotten the sheet, make sure you sign the sheet. You can buy other things that are easier to deposit besides cash, but that's not so good. Or one of the best techniques is casinos. This is why casinos are so expensive, are so popular with organized criminals. And by the way, in Britain, gambling earnings not even taxable. So what you do is you walk into you don't want to do this in the same casino more than once, but you can walk in with a big shopping bag of 50,000 pounds and walk up to the window and say, 50,000 in chips, please. And the cashier takes the money and gives you 50,000 chips. And then you walk over to the roulette wheel, put one chip on black. They spin the wheel, it comes up red, and like, oh my God, it's not my lucky day. I gotta cash in. You go back to the window and say, here are my chips. Could I just have a check? And they give you a check for 50,000 pounds. And you can then say, if people say, where'd you get that money? You say, I won it. You know, I took 10 pounds into this casino and I had a really lucky night. So there are these techniques that small time criminals use. This is not big time criminal money. This is retail money laundering.
I read in The Economist, I think a year ago, about how wealthy Chinese businessmen are using casinos in Macau to be able to take money out of the country because the Chinese government has some limits on how much money you can take out of
$50,000 a year. And that's with special permission.
But then they are buying tourism packages to Macau where they buy in advance X amount of chips to play in the casino and they go on holidays, withdraw the money, and then it's out of the country.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't impugn the honor of any nationality's businessman, but in general, where you have currency controls and limits on what you can take in and out of countries, that's the thing. By the way, you probably heard of not Thomas Cook Travel. There was a big travel agency, a big British travel agency that just went bankrupt last year. You would free buy your holidays. They started, sadly, I forget their name, but they started in the 50s when Britain had currency controls, how much you could leave Britain with. And so their business was pay us and you'll get a prepaid holiday and you won't need to breach the limits of taking cash outside Britain. So it's done everywhere. Wherever governments put in rules, I told you yesterday, criminals are about as entrepreneurial as you can get. Always look at what criminals are doing. I was a Marine. We learned to use these landing craft. You ever see in pictures of D-Day, these boats go up, and then the front comes down, everybody runs out? Do you know who invented those? They were not invented by the military. Those were invented during Prohibition in the United States because people who were running illegal liquor onto the beaches wanted to be able to get the cargo of liquor on and off the boat quickly. And the Marine Corps saw that and said, hey, those boats for getting stuff on and off beaches quickly look really useful. So criminals are entrepreneurial. Watch criminals. But just don't be a criminal. So you can start placing and getting stuff in there. But what about layering? I mean, how do you hide the origin? Because you can't just say, oh, yeah, I keep going to the casino. You got to disguise the source of ownership. And you can do that either by wiring stuff very quickly, which if you want to use jurisdictions that have a legal obligation to secrecy. Now, let me give you a hint. If you've heard like, oh yeah, Switzerland is a great place to park secret money. If you walk in, if I as an American walk into a Swiss bank with a suitcase of cash, and they'll say, who are you? And I'll give them my American passport, and I'll hand them the suitcase of cash, and they'll say, welcome, Mr. Jones. If you could just wait in this room for a minute, we'll be right back. And the next people who walk through the room are the police. They put me in handcuffs and they take me away because I'm breaking the law. And Swiss banks now get 50% of any money that they help seize. you really got to be careful about what jurisdiction you use. And the other reason you have to be careful is people who will hide your money for you, unless you're very powerful indeed, sometimes they will hide your money from you. And then what are you going to do? I had a Spanish friend who had money in the Caribbean, and 5 million euros walked away. But since it was offshore and unreported, what was he going to do? Call the Spanish authorities and say my 5 million euros just got stolen? So don't do this stuff. Okay? Just this is not a place where you, as an amateur, want to play. There are people who do this every day, backed by serious muscle, and you're not that person. But in general, what you're trying to do is get money into the financial system, right? What you'll sometimes find is once you got say 10 million into an account, a friend of mine did nothing for the CIA except go around to Mexican banks and talk to people and say, could you please explain to me why you opened an account yesterday and within 3 minutes, $10 million was wired into it, and then 20 minutes later, you wired that $10 million out, and then you closed the account by the time you went to lunch? And they'd say, no, I can't explain to you why I did that, other than the fact if I didn't do it, they'd kill my family. Because what you'll receive is a request to open this account, wire to the other account, and close the account, and you'll receive that with pictures of your children playing at the playground. What are you going to do? You love your kids? You're going to call that love? You're just a bank teller. You're not a drug smuggler. But if you do that 10 times, good luck tracing the money, right? So, really hard. Usually you're using offshore tax havens and offshore centers. Often these places are designed to make information hard to learn. So for example, there are some that don't keep computer records. Who opened the account? If you want to know who opened the account, you have to fly to that place, apply to a local judge, prove you need access to that information, go to the courthouse, then go to the bank, and maybe finally learn who does that. And guess what? By the time you've done that, the person who owns the account probably already knows you're doing that, and the money's moved on. It's really hard to do. On the other hand, someone was asking me about offshore centers yesterday, and I explained that my mentor, who was very wealthy, died. His apartment or his townhouse in New York was owned by a Panama corporation. Now, he was the most honest man I knew. He was just very wealthy. And in America, you can be sued so much. He just did it as a form of asset protection. If his maid tripped and fell down the steps and then said, pay me, he would say, sue me. But by the way, I don't own anything in America. You'll have to go to Panama and sue me in Panama, where the laws are different, and so on. So there are legitimate uses for offshore businesses, and we know multinational companies use them for legitimate purposes, but they're also used a lot by money laundering people. Basically, there are places that will accept money from anyone. They don't care. One of the reasons I agreed to work for the financial advisors I did, I was approached with an offer. Do I want to work for this Spanish financial advisor? And then I checked with my network. Anybody ever hear of these people? I mean, I knew who they were, but I just wanted to check. And a guy in my network said, yeah. They came here to Brazil, and I had some friends who wanted to give them money, and they wouldn't take the money because my friends couldn't prove where it was from. And I said, okay, I'll do business with those guys. They're on it. They're genuinely on it. Most people will just take money wherever it's from. There are plenty of places where it's actually illegal to disclose information about who owns the account. On the other hand, you got to find a place that won't ask questions, and then find another place that won't ask questions, and so on. And you're doing that for reasons not just of money laundering, but also sometimes tax evasion. And don't go to that would be my would be my overall advice. Okay. Sooner or later, that's got to end up where you want to spend it. Anybody here ever spend time in the Caribbean? Oh my God, is it boring? I had to spend. I had a girlfriend who lived in Barbados. I kept having to visit her. Jesus, there's nothing to do in Barbados. At some point, the beach gets boring. So you want to move the money to somewhere like Manhattan, London, where you want to spend it. And again, that can be tricky. You can read all this in the slides, but one thing you should understand is real professionals will hide who actually owns something. So it's not just a question of genuinely, if you have a boat, maybe you want to own that out of Cyprus. In the EU, if you want a boat that passes European regulations with the minimum amount of cost and headache, register the boat in Poland. If you want to own that same boat with a minimum problem with wealth tax and other things, registered in Malta, and so on. So there are different structures to own certain stuff in tax efficient ways. Yes.
Some people say that the inner city of London is the money.
It certainly participates in enormous ways, particularly with laundering Russian money, but also money from Central Asia and Chinese money. Yeah, these people are people who are motivated by. Look, you guys, how many people here want to go into finance? You think finance attracts smart people? Finance attracts some combination of very smart people and a huge percentage of people who should probably be working at Kentucky Fried Chicken. Okay, a huge number of dumbasses who simply sort of say, "Oh yeah, gee, me like money, money there, me go work for money." What's worse is some of them end up getting rich, and they actually still think they're smart because it's kind of like buying a lottery ticket. You start the right hedge fund, it works out. Yeah, you're a genius, and you actually think you're a genius instead of lucky. But what you tend not to find in the city is a huge percentage of people with good morals. However, it turns out being an honest person is the best long-term strategy you can have. It really is. Do not get rich quickly. Get rich slowly and honestly. It's best for everybody concerned. But it's hard. And actually, it's not hard. It just takes self-discipline. It doesn't even take intelligence. But it can be tempting when you're given a chance to make it good fun. But there are all these ways to create layers of who actually owns things and who doesn't. On the other hand, you really might want to ask, okay, you finally found a bank that will take your money and keep it secret. And they seem like nice people. And that's great. But you should know this. Remember I talked about false flag operations? The BCCI was famous through the 70s and 80s as if you were a dictator in the Middle East, if you were a drug dealer in the Middle East, if you were an arms dealer in the Middle East, if you were doing anything dirty, BCCI asked no questions. They would help you with your financial needs. Who owned BCCI? Who started it? Christians in action, along with French intelligence. CIA and French intelligence started it. Because if you want to figure out who's doing bad stuff, again, start a bank that gets a reputation for, we help people do bad stuff. And everybody who does bad stuff brings you their money, and then you watch. And you're very selective about who you choose to take down. But whenever somebody is willing to, something shouldn't work. A VPN shouldn't work. Who owns it? A bank does illegal stuff. Why? Be suspicious. Maybe you got lucky. Quite often, when you find that hitman on the dark web, when you buy those drugs, maybe it's a legitimate dealer, or maybe you've just fallen in. Oh, that's the other thing. For many years, for about 3 years, all the criminals around Europe knew there was a certain brand of phone they could get, specially modified, It had the cameras taken out. It had a lot of the functionality taken out. It was super secure, and everybody used it to set up drug deals and hire hitmen and do other things. Yeah, what's the punchline? Whole thing was established by the American FBI, and then everybody got rolled up with good evidence. You can post an article about it. Sucks to be a criminal. So the other thing you should be aware of is information leaks. So the Panama Papers was a leak by about the clients of a Panamanian law firm that helped people do this, and a lot of people got embarrassed. We still don't know who leaked the information. But among other things, and this is perfectly legal, David Cameron's father was a client of this law firm. He set up an offshore trust to help them. I have nothing against offshore trusts to protect wealth. I have used them. I believe in them. But that doesn't mean they're a criminal. But I'm not sure I necessarily love it, pasted all over the world that I'm a client of those people. Information in the digital age leaks. Just be honest. It's so much simpler. As I mentioned yesterday, if you're involved with any company that either is American or raises debt or equity in American markets, and you encounter something illegal, please, please, please turn them in. Whistleblower award of more than $500,000 for company insider. SEC awards nearly $4 million to whistleblower. Okay? They give away money. You turn them in. The good thing that if you see it, by far the smart move. If they're subject to the jurisdiction of the SEC, turn them in and get some money for it. You probably lose your job. Okay, so once you've layered it into the source, you have to integrate it back into the economy's legitimate funds. One great way to integrate money used to be bars, because they have very poor stock control and they're a cash business. And so suddenly, it's easy to explain where the cash came from. You can open a bar that has no customers, but still walk in to the bank every Friday and say, or every Monday and say, here's what we earned this week. Give the bank the cash, it's nice and clean, it's integrated in the economy, spend it. But as stock controls have gotten better for alcohol use, that's harder and harder. Can anybody think of another business that would be really good, does a lot of cash business? You could set one up, and even if it's unprofitable, you could credibly walk into a bank and say, I earned this.
A mattress store?
A mattress store. Why a mattress store?
Because it's very, very low at operating expenses. You can keep it running kind of for a very long time. You can make a stable amount of income on it. It's a pretty reputable business to have. And it's quite
Maybe. My problem is, so the problem with business like that is Italian, not to impugn the honor of Italian Americans, but it was famous in the United States for many years that Italian pizzerias would launder money for Italian organized crime. But then the IRS got smart, the Internal Revenue Service, the tax authorities got smart, and they would go and they'd say, hey, you said you sold 10,000 pizzas last month. We know that you've only ordered 12 pizza boxes. How exactly did you deliver 10,000 pizzas with only 12 boxes? You need something with no physical inventory. Other ideas?
Laundromats?
Laundromats are good, but then it's all change. And increasingly those damn machines are electronic. But they're good for meeting people. If you're setting up a nesting meet, both do your laundry at the same time, it's incredible. Yes.
Sorry, American candy stores.
American candy stores are good, but again, you've still got the problem with this loading. A lot of what they're selling is just totally counterfeit E-number shit for high prices to stupid tourists. Gonna give it away. New school is nail bars. Ladies, you ever walk by nail bars and they're totally empty, but they're there the whole time you're studying in London. It's like, why does no one ever go in there to have their nails done? Just a bunch of ladies looking bored, sitting there, and they have no one's gonna be like, okay, you didn't buy enough nail polish. come on, you do a bunch of nails that way. So there are all sorts of businesses people set up to integrate it, but this is pretty small time stuff. The big money is if you really want to do this stuff, this is retail stuff. This is the equivalent of diamonds or art. There's a whole nother layer that gets into trade misinvoicing and fake loans and all this stuff that goes on in the city that launders serious cash. But as I said, if you earn $1 million from arms trafficking, you deposit it in different ways in bank accounts, you wire it all over the hell to anonymous shell companies, and then they buy real estate in the United States, then you rent out. You own this piece of real estate, you rent it out, you get nice legitimate cash coming in as rental. So you'll get the slides. Those are the very basics of money laundering. That's not what we came here to do. Well, it's not the only thing we came here to do. I wanted to talk about current events. I don't have slides on Gaza and the Middle East, but let me give you my take on Gaza. I want to give Hamas credit for coming up with a truly innovative strategy. Hamas, to my knowledge, pioneered a military strategy in which you actively seek to impose the maximum amount of damage on your own population in order to defeat your enemy. It's a form of brilliance. If the Israelis do not respond to October 7th, they look weak and the government falls. Now this government falls. He's got the right way to push. But if you do respond, the international community says, whoa, 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 that's disproportionate. You can't do that. And you're even alienating many Jews who don't even live in Israel. So full credit to Hamas for coming up with an amazingly, inhumanly, psychopathically brutal strategy that appears to be working. That's putting Israel in an impossible situation. How that ends, I do not know. I can tell you that Hezbollah is infinitely more competent than Hamas in terms of pure military capability. They're all over the world. They're particularly in Latin America, but they're also in Europe and other places. Hezbollah is a very formidable adversary. Plus, you've got other Iranian proxies of varying degrees of control by the Iranians. You've got Shia militias in Iraq attacking the Americans. You've got the Houthi rebels in Yemen attacking shipping. You've got problems in Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank, working for Iran. So Israel is in a very difficult position, and don't ask me how it ends. One key to having it end is probably the Saudis, because Saudi really wants a deal with Israel. Because what they share in common is they both hate the Persians. Hate is a strong word. They're both opposed by the Persians. The Persians oppose them. Persians being the Iran. And America also, and China is also involved. It's complicated. I have no idea how it will end. I'm not that kind of super forecaster. Yes.
Do you think that, I feel like a lot of US establishment figures would like to think that if there wasn't a corrupt charlatan in charge of Israel now, let's say if it was a Benny Gantz style figure, a military establishment figure, center right, there wouldn't be this much destruction, and they would use some of their surgical strike abilities. There wouldn't be this much.
Yeah, I think this is a debate happening in Israel now. To what degree is the IDF, Israeli Defense Force, fighting and dying simply for electoral advantage to keep Netanyahu in power? I don't have enough information to know. It appears to be credible, but I plead agnosticism on that issue. I'm so glad none of these are my problems to solve. But I have to, as I say, top points for real military psychopathic innovation to use your own population as a weapon. It's amazing. Yes.
Obviously, I'm just asking for your opinion. How do you think this unravels with the Trump presidency?
That's what everybody wants. Trump will never be president. There's no way Americans would be that stupid. I used to say. And so tacky. That's what offends me most. He's just so vulgar. It's short. It's an embarrassment. Honestly, what bothers me most about Trump is not himself. It's what he's taught me about my fellow countrymen. I thought we were better than that. Apparently we're not. But that's not your question. The question is, what happens in the Middle East? In general, the Trump administration in the first Trump presidency was pretty sympathetic to Israel. Some people felt overly sympathetic to Israel. So, for example, moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was a big win for the Israeli right, but the State Department was wildly opposed. I'm not sure extreme figures make peace easier. The one reason why Trump might make peace easier, not only in the Middle East, but also in Ukraine and also in the South China Sea, is exactly because you've heard this sort of crazy, if strategy is about rational calculation, it can be rational to appear crazy. That way you're not predictable. If you're known to be rational all the time, that's irrational. So it's rational to be crazy. Hey, with Trump, you got it. The guy is wildly unpredictable. True. I work with someone who spent time in the Trump White House, working for the CIA. He was not a briefer, but his friends were. And he literally said it's like they needed aftercare when they come out of briefing Trump, that the CIA briefers, can you believe that's the most powerful guy in the world? He's not faking. He really appears to be a sociopath. And I thought we were better than that. We're not. So I don't know. Is the answer. I don't. I don't know. He's batshit crazy. I think he's stupid. No, I think he's a particular form of idiot savant. Do you know what an idiot savant is? You ever see the movie Rain Man? It's someone who's got a particular talent in one area and is basically otherwise autistic. On the other hand, I have to tell you that most democratic systems, most political systems select sociopaths. Okay? It's very hard to think of a country that isn't run by some species of sociopath. So you have to think, what system selects the best sociopaths? What do I mean by that? I mean, if you even think who climbs to the very top of a private club or a corporation, these are very driven people. They're selective. They're also very driven, very single-minded. There was a story, Lyndon Johnson was president of America during the Vietnam War, and he was not considered to be a successful president, but he'd been a great senator, then he'd been president for 1.5 terms. He took over when Kennedy was assassinated, then got elected. At the end of his life, he's in his 80s, and he knows he's dying. He's interviewed, and the interviewer says, "Mr. Johnson, you came to Washington, D.C. first at age 16. Tell us about your first morning in Washington, D.C." Lyndon Johnson had come to Washington, D.C. as a congressional intern. And in those days, congressional interns all lived in one big boarding house. Johnson said, "My first morning in Washington, I brushed my teeth 8 times and took 6 showers." The interviewer was like, OCD or something like, what, crazy? And he said, "No, I knew at the end of the first week, congressional interns elected a leader. And because we had communal bathrooms in the boarding house, that allowed me to go onto every floor and meet everybody while brushing your teeth, say, 'Hi, I'm Lyndon Johnson. How are you?' And guess who got elected leader of congressional interns that year? If you do that when you're 16, you're a special kind of crazy. And if you look at the biography of most politicians, they work hard to appear to be, we're just regular people. Yeah, sure. That's how you get to be the most powerful person in your society. Just by being a regular guy or a regular girl. No, 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 no. These people are ferociously driven. They are not normal. And I don't care if you're talking about the government of a tiny country or a big country. They're not normal. So as I say, the big political sciences question is, how do you pick non-sociopathic leaders? And I believe I have the answer. I would genuinely rather be ruled by 400 random names in the American phone book than our 400 elected representatives, our 435 elected representatives in Congress. I would prefer there was an Athenian system that sometimes choose leaders by lot, by chance. I would trust more. I don't want to trust the people who stand up and say, yeah, I think I should run the league. No way. Anyway, sorry for the editorializing. That's my question. These people are crazy. Yes.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about how the ongoing conflict in the Middle East can affect the startup ecosystem that has been building in Israel? And how resilient do you think it's going to be? And where are all these businesses going to, and the capital flow to?
I don't think they're going to leave Israel unless Tel Aviv gets an Iranian nuclear weapon on it. I have full faith in the ultimate resilience of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. In the short run, you can say it's bad, but as I've described in other parts of the course, military necessity often leads to a lot of innovation. So people are trying things now that will have big spin-off effects, and so I have faith in that. If you're interested in this question, there's an interesting book called The Israel Test that basically looks at what happens to societies in history over time when you expel the Jews. Tends not to be a good outcome. Tends to start a period of decline. Anti-Semitism is a really dumb strategy. So I have faith in Israel. But I want to get to Ukraine. Ukraine is quite close to my heart and quite close to my house. And I studied Russian for 8 years. I have spent a large portion of my life thinking about Russia and Russians. And I want to say, for the record, there are elements of Russian culture that I find fully admirable, from Tchaikovsky to ballet to Dostoevsky to Tolstoy to Ilya Repin to Mr. Mendeleev, who gave us the periodic table we looked at yesterday. However, current regime is criminal. I would remind you that the war did not start 2 years ago. The war started, well, you can go way back, but the most recent war started in 2014 with the seizure of both Crimea and parts of the Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. Both of those were taken in 2014. Then, of course, there was this push 2 years ago, and then the brave Ukrainians took some of that back. But about 20% of the country is now occupied illegally by Russia. And there are many people who say, well, maybe they should trade land for peace. And my question to most of those people is, when a Frenchman says, and I say, okay, which part of France you want to give to Russia for peace? And they're not willing to give parts of their land for peace. They think the Ukrainians should give their land. If an American says to me, well, they need to give up some land for peace, I say, okay, you want to give them Florida? The best part of Florida is its proximity to the United States anyway. It's barely, they call themselves a sunshine state. Some people call them America's whack. Anyway, it's not my favorite place, you can tell. I did start the class with Russia as an example of how its defining feature is indefensibility, and that their geography makes for quite uncertain political culture that needs a strong military, strong secret police, and essentially makes them what's known as the prison of nations. But that's not an excuse. It's just an explanation. Its defining characteristic is its indefensibility. And they have been invaded all the time. Can someone point to a country that hasn't been invaded all the time? Switzerland? Not that many. As I say, all of you are descended very successful killers. That's why you're here. But to get more into why do I think Putin did this, I think he generally has a spiritual thing. He's getting older. He thinks about his place in history. Ukraine was very clearly, even before 2014, it was drifting west. And then 2014 just sped that up wildly. Wildly. Ukraine started to want to be more Western. Let's join the EU. Let's sort of, in fact, what kicked off events of the so-called Maidan rebellion was the heads of Ukraine considering a free trade deal with the EU. Russia also remains quite dependent on fossil fuel revenue. And they looked at this green transition talk and thought, wow, we're going to have to use it or lose it. If it really is drawing away slowly from fossil fuels, we're not going to get more powerful. We're not going to get more leverage than we have now. They were sold quickness. This will be quick. One of the problems with personalist autocracies, meaning dictatorships run by one person, is you tend not to get promoted by bringing the boss bad news. And nobody expected, who understood Ukraine, that this would be quick and easy. But I guarantee you, this was intended, by the way, to be a relatively small military operation with a huge secret operation behind it. So there were Russian FSB teams and SBR teams and GRU teams that had paid off a lot of people to be ready for them. And so they thought they'd sweep in, and most of the population would be like, yeah, whatever, we're cousins. Fantasy. But a lot of people took Russian money in advance. But turns out, remember this, often you can't buy people. You really can't buy people. You can rent them, but you can't buy them. And turns out a lot of Ukrainians were rented, not bought by the Russians. And they didn't cooperate and do what was expected of them. And that's good news, right? Meanwhile, my country has just left Afghanistan in a completely chaotic, stupid, and humiliating manner. So we're not going to intervene. Very clearly, I know what young Europeans will fight for. What will young Europeans fight for? From what I can tell, 6 weeks of holiday a year and avocado toast. They don't give a shit about their country. There are a few exceptions. Poles will fight. Anglo-Saxons are war legislative. British like fighting. The French are pretty good. They'll fight sometimes. But most people, you don't really believe it. You're not going to fight for them. Zelensky, by the way, was pretty unpopular at this point. He's got a deal with China. So his eastern flank is protected. COVID recovery wasn't going so well. And Putin genuinely believes there's no such thing as the Ukraine. They're like country Russia. It would appear as if he really believes that. And that is in defiance of hundreds of years of Ukrainian culture and hundreds of years of Ukrainian identity. And it's at odds with the facts. But it is a very common Russian belief, not just among Putin, but among the Russian elites. So he fundamentally misunderstood the target and thought this was the right moment. He is achieving exactly what he hoped to avoid. I genuinely believe Ukraine will be a member of the EU. It will not be a member of the EU next year, but certainly in the next 15 years, it will be in, with restrictions and everything else. But the first time I ever heard of the European community, I was at a party in Washington, D.C., and I was talking to a Spanish girl, and she explained to me that Spain had just joined this thing called the European Community, but it wasn't fair because Spaniards weren't allowed to go work freely in the rest of the community for another 7 years. Okay, yeah, these restrictions always happen, but Ukraine will get there. Yes.
But so as you said, like we kind of saw this Russia coming into Ukraine, and Ukraine has been asking to get into the EU for years. Why didn't we let them in before this?
Well, because Ukraine is blessed by the most fertile piece of farmland, arguably in the world.
So
And remember how much the EU is driven by farm prices. There's also slowly, remember the EU, the bureaucracy is built around basically, it started as the European coal and steel community with France and Germany
yeah.
and Northern Italy. So there they are. And then, okay, they let in Spain and Portugal and Greece, but then they also let in all these pain in the ass Central Europeans. Poles, the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Romanians, the Bulgarians, you got all these problems. And they're not just problems and expensive problems, they're poor. And, well, hold on, our voice isn't quite as loud as it used to be.
Oh yeah.
Why would we let in the largest country in Europe with the most fertile farmland that's also poor? No way. Oh, and by the way, a hell of a lot of German firms in particular, but also French firms, do a lot of business with Russia, and they were under strict instructions. Shut up about bringing the Ukrainians into.
So you really think when this is over, Ukraine will be admitted?
I would assign it a 92% probability,
Okay.
a near certainty. But over what time frame?
Yeah.
And under what conditions, I don't know. But I genuinely believe.
Even if it's really weakened and destroyed and
All right, Europe was after we cleaned up. Look, Europe made 2 attempts to kill itself, and who showed up and helped?
yeah.
Both times, Americans had. At one point, by the way, when France was leaving NATO,
Yeah.
Charles de Gaulle demanded every American soldier off French soil in 90 days. And do you know what President Johnson wanted to send the answer back with? He instructed his Secretary of State to say, we think we could get the live American soldiers out of France in 90 days, but it might take longer to excavate the 40,000 American dead that are on French soil. Oh, and by the way, one Central Russian myth is, oh, by the way, we saved you guys from the Nazis. And it's kind of true. The Russian story is, we took care of Napoleon for you. We bore a terrible price in the First World War for you, and we defeated the Nazis for you. And you're still such a grateful bastard Western Europeans, you won't bow at our feet. I think they're full of crap in many dimensions of that, because they were as bad as the Nazis. But that's their story, and they're sticking to it. So I do think they're going to be, yes.
Would it not be possible that if there's country make Britain or Russian even angrier?
Yes, it will. This is why he must be defeated. Now, but remember, NATO and the EU are separate things. And I would love to see Ukraine and NATO. If Ukraine had come into NATO, they wouldn't be losing hundreds of people a day now. Right? They should have come in. But I do know it scared them and pissed them off. I think I have a slide. Yes. Here's the original NATO, then NATO expands, NATO expanded. Now, but remember, the way the Russians portrayed NATO expansion to our borders is like America's pushing. Until Sweden and Finland came in, one of the things all of these countries we expanded NATO into, they have one thing in common. They had been occupied by the Russians for 40 years. In some ways, we were a little hesitant about bringing them in, but they wanted to come in. And so one big difference between Russia and most other countries is Russia doesn't take seriously that little countries should get a say in what they do. They basically say, we're a great power, you're on our border, so shut up and follow our directions. And international law instead says it's up to the Ukrainians or the Poles or the Czechs or the Swedes, or they can join whatever alliance they want. And I support that. So this picture of NATO pushing against them and that's somehow anti-Russian, I disagree. If the country wants to join, anyway, that's where I stand on the NATO. So, and by the way, as a strategic genius, Putin effectively doubled the percent of his country that's facing NATO. Now, wow, there's a big win. Good plan, dude. But even without Ukraine joining, Finland, it used to, their border up here used to just be Norway. Now, sorry, Finland's joined too. And the Baltic is a NATO lake. So it's been a real strategic disaster for Russia, which warms my heart. Yes.
More on NATO. How is this lie about sort of there being an agreement to not expand NATO beyond Germany been allowed to circulate even to the Republican Party? It's just untruth.
It's genuinely, the Russians have been saying that for the last 25 years, and yet there's no piece of paper. What appears to the one, so I looked into this quite closely. It would appear as if in a conversation with Gorbachev, the American Secretary of State at the time, James Baker, did in conversation say, yeah, well, maybe we could come to an agreement that we wouldn't expand NATO. And the Russians went home and said, they've agreed not to expand NATO. And the American, literally the next day, when Baker reported that conversation, the American State Department explicitly got in touch with the Russians and said, hold on, we didn't promise anything. On the other hand, to be sensitive to Russian feelings, until 2014, what we didn't do was open NATO bases in the new countries. So all along here, they joined, but there's no like American depot in Poland. Now there is. Since 2022, we've said, okay, fine, screw you. You were trying to be nice about your feelings. We're putting forward bases. So, but I just asked a Russian, could you tell me where on paper you said this? Because by the way, you can also say there's something called the Budapest Memorandum, where when Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear weapons, Russia, China, Britain, and the United States all agreed to guarantee Ukrainian sovereignty. People make promises all the time, even on paper, and then they break. But there's no piece of paper. Yes.
Can you please explain what would be the motivation to go ahead and stop this conflict? Because there are various reports that to stop this conflict.
Stop it.
Because there are various beneficiaries, like the US is benefiting in some way, India is benefiting in some way, Saudis are benefiting in some way because of the oil business and like the supply chain situation currently
So
globally.
Europe is in it. Okay, so the first people with skin in this game are the Ukrainians themselves. I would remind you there's a human cost to this. Every day, people are losing arms and legs and lives. I don't know a Ukrainian over the age of 18 with a phone with people's names in it. The phone's never going to ring again. They're never going to get a message from that person. Okay? And by the way, a lot of Russians in that boat too. So there's that human cost. It's not small. Then there are all the people who were benefiting in the developing world from cheap Ukrainian grain, and that's a problem. They're not bad. But you can say other grain makers are better. But most of all, it complicates enormously the European security picture. And there's a whole group of Americans who would really, really, really like to focus, honestly, on, for lack of a better term, working constructively with China on an understanding about the Pacific. And this is a big distraction to that. But most of all, there's a general question of international order. This is the first time since the Second World War where one nation has annexed, not just invaded, but annexed and said, this is ours now. And we're not giving it back. I don't want to live in a, most countries don't want to live in a world where that happens. I mean, if you love colonialism, hey, that's what they're trying to do. They're literally invading and taking land. So
I just have a follow-up question to this. So, what do you think would the timeline be for this conflict to completely?
and I might have a slide on it. So I'll get there. In my humble opinion, this is still a war of Soviet succession, right? The Soviet Union collapsed relatively peacefully in 1989. And you had a lot of countries formed: Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Belarus, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, you name it. It broke up, and there wasn't that much fighting. There was a little violence, but not that much. But empires rarely end that smoothly, and you can view this through the long historical lens. It's like, this is still a fight about how the Soviet Union broke up, and the Russians are pissed about it. They did have, I saw you had a hand up. Is it, should we do it now? Or?
We can do it later.
Okay, but I will get to it. Russia had a big mobilization last winter. They did take Bakhmut. Bakhmut was not important until people decided a lot of people will die there. And the casualty trade-off was probably 4 Russian casualties for every Ukrainian trade-off. You have to fade up with a smart choice by the Ukrainians, but they did it. Then the U.S. delayed aid, and that's the Trump people in Congress. But the line has stabilized. I'm not as worried as I was a month ago. What's not stabilized is the Ukrainian energy supply. And that is the rationale of the air bombardment. They basically want to bomb Ukraine into no energy. And that has a couple of things. That slows down Ukrainian war effort. They think it will break Ukrainian will, and it will send a message to the Europeans and the Americans. Think how expensive this is going to be to fix. The longer this goes on, the more expensive this is going to be to fix. So you better make peace now, because it's only going to get worse. I think their calculation is wrong. That's what I think they're thinking. I was pleased when Putin was charged in the International Criminal Court, indicted, but it does make peace harder. He's got no incentive to cut a deal. He's not going to The Hague, right? Why should he make peace? This is now existential for Mr. Putin. If he loses, he dies. Or if he loses and agrees to step away from power, the first thing his replacement does is, I'd really like some sanctions lifted. How about we hand out that guy, Mr. Putin? He's got nowhere to go. He's no longer safe. Little games like moving nukes to Belarus. You may have heard that they moved Russian nuclear weapons to Belarus. What that does is it scares the grannies in Europe because, nukes. But it also makes it that much more dangerous for the West to attempt to destabilize Belarus. Shit, there's suddenly nukes there too. That's what you spend your time thinking about is, where are the nukes? And they're like, okay, we're going to put some nukes here. So you better not try to peel Belarus off. Because what I work on at Oxford is scenarios for the dissolution of the Russian Federation. And one of them is, hey, go ahead. Belarus is technically a separate country. We can peel that off. Well, it's harder to peel off if they're nukes. They've done horrible things. By the way, to the environment, just to the environment. They keep doing these really horrible things because they're signaling, for us, this is existential. To them, this is a war with the West as a whole. So how might this end? Some of you were asking. Do you want me to take your question?
Yeah, so you mentioned that there's the human cost associated in Ukraine, but isn't there a double standard to say that, there's human cost in Ukraine, but not in Gaza?
Sure, there's a double standard in the sense that different people value lives different ways. As I think I mentioned, in the Syrian civil war, 400,000 people died. If Europe would not intervene, if 400,000 dolphins were being killed, or gorillas, or blue whales, Europe would have intervened, right? Because we really care about animal lives in a way we don't care about human lives. I don't know that there's a double standard. There's certainly a layer of sympathy that attaches to what can be perceived as a genuine innocent party, where it's very difficult to say Israel left Gaza almost 20 years ago. It was not occupied. Now, it was closed off. And while it was closed off, it was given billions of dollars of aid every year and billions of tons of cement every year. And what did they do with it? Did they build school? No, they built the Gaza Underground, a terror network, and then repeatedly fired rockets into Israel between when Israel left and now. So it is, and by the way, at some point, you do choose your government. Hamas, the people of Gaza, in some sense, under great coercion at first, but they support Hamas. It's a very unsatisfying answer, and honest people can disagree. Is there in general, there's a pecking order, right? In the Western world, if you're white and rich and a cute blonde kid, your life is worth this. And if you're kind of old and brown and ignorant and from somewhere else, your life's worth that. Now, I don't feel that way. I'm a humanist. But the reality is that is the double standard that operates everywhere. Just different people have a different pecking order. But yeah, one could say there's a double standard. Certainly. I told you at the beginning of this class, I say stuff that might be distasteful, and I don't even necessarily agree with it. I'm just kind of explaining how I think the world is. And yeah, there may be a double standard. I don't think the war ends from. Oh, this question.
But linked to that, isn't the West more prone to helping Ukraine in the sense that it's a democracy and we want to protect democracy?
Yes, Zelensky's government was very different from Hamas.
Yeah, where that's more chaotic and not at all supposed to be more complicated. And we want to protect democracy.
It's not just protect democracy. I mean, Hamas was literally a terrorist organization.
Yeah,
Gaza was run by a government that was recognized internationally.
I think that's the difference.
But again, not recognized by everybody.
Yeah.
But recognized by most European. So yeah, that's part of the problem. Oh, and by the way, Ukraine did spring out of Ukraine, go into Russia, murder, rape, and kidnap thousands of people and bring them back into Ukraine before the Russians invaded. But Hamas did that to Israel before the Israelis went in and put them to school, so to speak. Yeah.
Do you think it's a mistake for America and the West, but I would say principally the US, to frame a lot of their geopolitical strategy around democracy versus not democracy?
I think it's deeply unwise. I happen to believe it's kind of true. I think that there are degrees of Westernness. Being Western is a set of, first of all, people talk about democracy. I do not believe democracy for its own sake. I believe democracy is part of a three-legged stool of select leaders regularly and change them through popular will, combined with protection of minority rights and impartial institution. And democracy is the best way to protect minority rights and provide for impartial institutions over time. But there are cultural and institutional underpinnings of that are difficult to exploit. Put it mildly. Ask your Afghan colleagues. And when that means, when I'm talking about the West, it also means, for example, is Japan part of the West? Is South Korea part of the West? Yeah, it is. Because they basically have the system of, we're going to rotate leaders, we have relatively impartial institutions, and we do have basic human rights protections. But not everybody agrees that even human rights are a good thing. I get it. Honest people disagree. But yeah, the West tends to support that general mood. Yes.
I'm just going back a bit towards what you said about ICJ's ruling, Putin.
When
With,
you indict, he has to show up and he can present defense too.
but the ICJ's ruling against Israel and the fact that US is imposing sanctions on the ICJ, there's a bit of double standard there. They're
And the
accepting.
US is also imposing sanctions on certain Israeli units, so I'll remind you, and certain settlers. That's one of the things that's really different about this. The US is imposing some sanctions on the Israeli right. And the Israeli right initially was scornful, and now they're like, oh shit, these things work, and they're scary, and they're hard. Look, there's always a double standard. I think there's shades of gray here. Remember, we're super forecasting. We're thinking in percentages. People have a reason for doing what they do, but that doesn't mean we have to be morally neutral on all questions. And by the way, obviously, I'm not remotely on any of these questions. Correct.
Yeah, I have a question about the sanctions we just talked about. Do you really think that in terms of resulting peace, sanctions is a good way, or it's just the threat is what is effective?
Sanctions are really satisfying. Emotionally.
But in terms of
But in terms of effectiveness, they're not always so effective. But they make people feel good. They make a good press headline. Over time, they can have effects. But they don't win wars, and they don't usually change state behavior. They're not effective in that sense. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do them. It's just don't expect miracles. Yes.
Do you think these true sanctions accelerated that move away from the dollar?
I'm hugely skeptical. I know that that's always the worry. So take the Chinese yuan, right? There's some theory that some sanctions going to compete with the dollar. It might, but right now, in terms of reserve currencies held by other nations, it's just behind the Canadian dollar. So before saying when is the Chinese yuan going to overtake the US dollar, you're going to have to take care of, get out of the way, the Canadian dollar, then the British pound, then the euro, then the Japanese yen, and then you can overtake the US dollar. I'm not
about the trading of oil.
Oh, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Here's the problem with that. If you're a Hong Kong business doing business with a Saudi business, where do you think that contract should? Forget what currency you're spending. Where's the contract probably originated? Usually, the United States or Great Britain, because it's considered a neutral venue where everybody understands the laws and everybody's got an equal chance to bribe the judge. I can't bribe a Russian judge. No way, he's not going to. Whereas in New York, yeah, everybody's got an equal chance. What I mean is, these are genuinely considered neutral jurisdictions. So the dollar is underpinned by a general body of contract law for enforcing these agreements, or for at least mediating between parties that most people can agree is neutral. And if you're an Indonesian palm oil guy who's selling palm oil to, say, a Kazakh company, you're not going to agree to have a Kazakh court adjudicate a dispute. You're going to do it in a G7 country. And that's what, when you're thinking about currencies and stuff, think about also which legal system are they using. A shockingly large percentage of commercial contracts happen in rule of law countries. I'm just conscious we're really going on. So I want to finish Ukraine, and then I'm going to do a career session. If you already have a job or think I'm full of shit, you're free to leave. There are different scenarios for how this might end. I don't think this is a short war, because even if Ukraine, by a miracle, pushed the Russians out of every square centimeter of Ukraine tomorrow, until Russia says, we're quitting, the war's not over. And if they say we're quitting, I would ask, for how long can I trust you? Somebody's got to lose and be seen to lose. Someone's got to say, I quit for this to end. So this goes on. This is a long war. What would it mean for Russia to win? I'll tell you, so far, if you ask me, who is the real winner of this war? Who do you guys think is the winner of this war?
US.
China. China. Same way China won 9/11. 9/11 distracted America. We chased our tail in the Middle East for 20 years while China got strong. China's winning. Russia will become basically a vassal state of China. I think if you ask me, like, what's the most likely outcome? Russia will become a vassal state of China. And if I were running operations against the Russians today for the CIA, I would literally be buying classified ads in Russian newspapers and in online spaces for Beijing boarding schools. Teach your children Russian, or sorry, teach your children Chinese. Parentheses, they're gonna need it because Russians don't want to be a vassal state of China. All of this used to belong to China, and then it was taken away in so-called unequal treaties of the 19th century. I think, in fact, just last week, guess what Putin decided to do? He's leasing a river to give China access to the sea here that it's been missing, because that's Russian. But gee, that part of China would like more sea access, and he's leasing. That is the beginning of a long process of China. It's a win-win situation for China. China wins twice. Again, we're going on inevitables, but when you say, oh, what if Ukraine doesn't get all its territory back, but it's still coming to the EU? Well, I would remind you that Cyprus is still divided between Northern Cyprus and Southern Cyprus, and nobody recognizes Turkey's illegal annexation of Northern Cyprus, but it's in the EU, so it can happen. It can happen. Yes.
Prince, how do you think if Poroshenko stays the president in 2018, would it change situation somehow, or still
who's
would
president?
come Poroshenko if he stayed president? If Zelensky wasn't elected, would it change situation?
I doubt it, but I don't know. But he makes lovely chocolates. Poroshenko. Yeah, that's
Have you
right.
tried?
Poroshenko.
Huh?
But I don't know. It's the short answer. I really don't know. I like historical counterfactuals, but I truly don't know enough about the internal politics of Ukraine. He might have been willing to cut a deal with Russia, maybe not. I don't know. And you know a lot more about Ukraine than I do. I'm sure you would. Yes.
What if Putin dies? Like, is there gonna be someone to like continue this, or is this just his crazy? I mean, surely
It's a good question.
surely there's some resistance in Russia, right? I mean, we just don't know about it, but there must be some people who are, you know,
Do
don't
I
wanna
have the
be-
why did he do this? No, I don't. So I thought I had a session on why I did. I don't think this is Putin's war. I think this is the war of the Russian elite. I think they're genuinely humiliated and pissed off about how the world changed in 1991. They genuinely mostly have contempt for Ukraine. And if this had worked out, Putin would have been a hero. You tend to see when a leader either loses power or dies in the middle of a conflict, often his successor continues that war. So I wouldn't, as much as I would love to read Putin's obituary tomorrow, I don't think it ends the war, unfortunately. But it will create space.
Yeah.
And confusion, which is why I love the Prigozhin.
There must be some Russians who are more like.
There are. If I
No.
were guessing, something like a third. And I'll tell you, the other people are deeply uncomfortable. So when I was in the Soviet Union, way back when I was in the Soviet Union, you'd get drunk with Russians. And at some point, and I mean no offense, they'd say, you Americans, with your Ronald Reagan and the Cold War, you think you're our opponents. You're not the real enemy. we both know who the real enemy is. And they look each, right? Basically, the Russians are racist as hell, and they fear China. And so I asked someone in British intelligence, like, why did Putin do this? Did you really think NATO is your big problem? You really think Germany is your problem? Your problem maybe is the rich, powerful, populous country that's growing in the east that you share a huge border with. Why did he do this? And apparently there was kind of a split in the Kremlin, generational split. People sort of 65 and up really hated NATO and really hated the West and saw this as their big chance and still are pissed off about 1991 and the breakup of the Soviet Union. So they're like, the Chinese will take care of themselves. We got to take care of the West. And apparently most Russians, sort of 55 and under, the lieutenant colonels, are saying, wow, not sure this was a good move, pissing off the entire West to become basically the gas station and coal mine and metal mining area of the Chinese state. This is probably not good for Russian sovereignty in the long run. But if I wanted to be very cynical, I would say it's in America's interest to keep Russia very weak, because a weak Russia also scares China. Instability from Russia tends to spill over into China. So if I wanted to keep Taiwan safe, or the status quo in Taiwan, one of the best ways to do that is to keep Russia very weak, to keep the Chinese worried about, what if there's a flip of government there? Then suddenly, so depends on how cynical you want. Another question.
What strategic goal do you think Putin wants to gain from his visit with General King?
I think, first of all, I think it's a so the question was what's Putin's strategic goal in visiting North Korea? I mean, Jesus. Speaking of sociopaths, nutbags. But speaking of the strategic use of appearing crazy, nobody's better than North Korea. The strategic use of, I'm crazy and in a wheelchair and super weak, but I've got these guns, and if you try to do something to me, I'm going to shoot you from my wheelchair. That's basically Korean strategic doctrine. Appear crazy and weak. But Putin did this. First of all, he's so pissed off the West. Second of all, because it's signaling to people, if you give me no other friends, I'm going to pick the worst possible friends and make trouble for you. And remember, South Korea was supplying not Ukraine directly, but what was happening was America has a certain number of artillery shells. We were shipping some to Ukraine, but we started to run out. Korea couldn't ship their shells to Ukraine, but they sold them to us so we could send more to Ukraine. So keeping the South Koreans remembering that Russia can make trouble for them is another useful one. That's that. Very conscious of time, but yes, more questions.
No, so generally based on like what you said about Russia, China, and their like sort of asymmetric relationship, couldn't that kind of motivate Russia to maybe end the war if they don't have China to rely on? Or because like even with Gazprom, they're not getting like good terms.
They're not getting right.
So,
And so I would like to sit down with Mr. Xi and say, hey, let's make a deal, right? Please sell us the Russians, so to speak. In other words, if you want access to European and American consumer markets for all your Chinese goods, you got to cut Russia off. And
is that a plausible strategy? Something that
I think people hoped for it in the first year of the war. I no longer hope for it. I think Mr. Xi genuinely believes the world is witnessing changes not seen in 100 years, as he was caught on camera saying. There's a general perception by apparently within Xi's inner circle, because I'm not his psychologist, I don't know if this is it would appear as if they genuinely believe the West is getting weaker and China continues to get stronger. Honest people can disagree about that. I do know that that was the way the world felt in 1975. The United States had just retreated from Vietnam. The Soviet Union was resurgent. America had huge riots at home, race riots, hippies, drug, weirdness, all these problems. And I do know that by 1989, we handed the Soviet Union its ass, and we were back.
But would
You got to ask yourself, is this, so the big debate is the problems in America and Europe, are they cyclical or structural? She appears to be betting problems in the West are structural. And the people like me believe they're cyclical and that we'll be back. And it probably will be generous.
But I mean, if you look at it from Russia's perspective, maybe like the pride or paranoia with respect to China, wouldn't that motivate them to cut ties, which would
I hope
ultimately
so. I hope so. Because remember, we used China to play. The United States and China basically became allies in the second half of the Cold War, and that's why we won. And there were people who said that's the game we should have played with Russia. We should have overlooked what they did in Ukraine because we need Russia too much as China gets stronger. I profoundly disagree. I would actually like to see much, much, much deeper cooperation between the United States and China to address problems of global concern. But I'm not called for advice by either party at any time. And
What do you think? Is it possible that Russia can become a democratic country? This little country is
my favorite outcome for Russia, if I had a magic wand, is I want Russia to become France. France has a glorious culture and a strong monarchical tradition. But they've stopped invading people and colonizing people. They kind of got over it. Yes, glorious France, wonderful. But okay, Algeria, you can be Algeria. Vietnam, you can still be Vietnam. You know, parts of Africa, you can still be Africa. So it's possible that imperial nations kind of get over it. Britain, by the way, has had some hard times getting over its empire. The hard part with Russia is France and Britain had an had a national identity before creating an imperial identity. And Russia never went through the stage of like, we're going to have a country before we conquer everybody else. Like their whole national story is, you know, we're spreading out, we're conquering everybody else. They have a real identity crisis. And that actually, I'll take other questions, but I want to play this because it's super offensive to Europeans. The current European myth is, we're a peaceful country. You see, after the Second World War, we realized that war is bad, peace is good. So we're peaceful. And the rest of the world should just learn from Europe. That is bullshit. Europe decided they would stop fighting wars when they kept losing them. Following the Second World War, Europe fought 20 years of colonial struggles all over the world to try to hold on to their empire. The French were fighting in Algeria. The French were fighting in Vietnam for the Americans. Thanks for that invitation, by the way. The British were fighting in Syria, and they didn't exactly leave India and Pakistan and Myanmar and so on gracefully, okay? Europe gave up on empire and gave up on fighting when they started losing. But they've now defined an identity. We are a peaceful place. And that worked really well while you were under the American security umbrella and Russia was weak. Now Russia is back and pushing hard. And so if you ask me like, wow, what problems does the Ukraine war pose for countries besides Ukraine? I think the big problem is for Europe itself. And let's watch the wonderful Professor Timothy Schneider, who, by the way, has a free 20-session, excellent YouTube course. He's a professor at Yale, but he has a wonderful YouTube course on history of Ukraine that you can watch at any time if you have 20 hours, but it's really good. If you want to learn more about the history of Ukraine, watch Timothy Schneider. So, can I make this work? Maybe, maybe not. Start those. Can I make this work? Yeah. Aha.
is forgetting about colonialism, right? That's part of the trick. Part of being a colonialist, a good colonialist forgets about colonialism, right? And has various devices of doing so. The European Union, for all of its undoubted virtues, is a project of forgetting about colonialism. They're not the only people, there are other ways to do it, but what the European Union does is it tells a story about how the Europeans fought the Second World War, they realized war was a very bad thing, and therefore they chose peace, and unlike the Americans, they stopped fighting wars. Yes, exactly. So exclamation point. And but that's not true. That's not true. What happened instead is that Europeans kept fighting wars until, this is much more banal, until they lost them. Which admittedly is like, that doesn't really work as the beginning of the speech in Brussels, and it doesn't really work as educational curriculum in Europe, but that's the truth. The Germans lost the Second World War, which is the colonial war. The French lost in Southeast Asia. They lost in North Africa. The Portuguese and the Spanish couldn't hold out in Africa any longer, right? And so on and so forth. At which point they then joined together to this European integration process. At which point they started telling the story about how Europeans are very peaceful people, and we've always been very peaceful, and we integrate, and look at us, and then look at the Americans, they're bad, right? That's actually the European national anthem. It's set to a tune by Beethoven, but those are the words. If you don't know German, that's actually what they're singing. Okay. Don't email me about that. Okay. All right. So it's Ode to Joy, of course. In fact, Ode to Joy. The words are by Schiller. All right. But the point is that there's a serious point here, which is that although,
well, I cut off the serious point. And my serious point is Europe has to work out what it wants to be and who it really is, because it was telling itself through the 90s and early 2000s, we're soft power. We're going to use the power of attraction to bring in countries. We're going to change Russia through trade, and all will be well. It didn't work. So now what? Well, now what appears to be the beginnings of European military stuff, and that means unlocking the German potential. And that still makes some of Germany's neighbors uncomfortable. I'll take one more question, and then I'm going to go on. I'm sorry, I'm going to go to my career talk, and then you're going to be free of me forever, unless you connect me on LinkedIn. But so I'll take these two gentlemen. Mila, I'm sorry.
I'll come to you at the end.
Why do you think that the West underestimated Russia's capabilities in sort of active measures and their ability to interfere in elections?
I don't want to underestimate their capabilities in active measures. I know people who underestimate their fortitude and their willingness to take casualties. We've always known there's a spiritual tradition in Russia. It was enhanced by the fact that for 3 generations, maybe 4 generations, the government was run by people who had either been on the run from the secret police. So Marxist-Leninist parties have built into them a certain level of paranoia because they started as illegal organizations. And they spent years underground. They're leaders, they're founding leaders. Imagine if George Washington had spent 20 years on the run from the British police and then started America. We'd have a very different system. Marxist-Leninist systems have built into them a sort of spiritual tradition that makes them good at this stuff. I have faith in the resilience of the West overall. But it doesn't mean there's not a fight there, and it doesn't mean we couldn't lose. We can lose. But I don't think we underestimate their active measures and their soft power. Oh, if you insisted that we did, I would explain it with money. It's a shed load of dirty money. And still in this now. And a lot of it's Russian. Yes.
Yeah, so historically speaking, in periods of relative peace, like a long peace in history, were the periods where global powers dominate.
Yes.
Like the Roman Empire or the
British
Pax Britannica, and now arguably it's.
By the way, it didn't feel so peaceful if you were Indian.
Yeah. But in general, it's arguably more peaceful, and
Yes.
now it is arguable that Pax Americana
is in
make the
jeopardy.
world
Weakening.
a safer place. Yeah. So, do you think the American influence is actually declining in the global landscape in the next few decades, and how? What's the implication to global
Okay,
stability?
so I have tried to sell you guys on the idea that you better be ready to make money from disorder because we're entering a disorderly phase. That does not mean that I'm entirely writing off the capability of some of the rich world, the West, and the East to maintain some level of order. I fear that we are at a truly structural rather than cyclical point. But I wouldn't be me if that's not my favorite outcome. So the reason I broke with the think tank I was with is because they were sort of like, hey, we're all screwed, yippee. And I'm sort of like, don't do that. I'm going to keep fighting to. I believe in the Renaissance. I believe in enlightenment. I believe in human rights. I believe in impartial institutions, the minority rights. I believe in a lot of this stuff. Why, I have problems with some of it. And I'm happy to share after class what I have problems with. But overall, I kind of believe in this project of a rules-based international order. But there are no guarantees that it stays in place. And if I were betting as an analyst, at the very least, we're going through a recession in a rules-based international order. I hope that answered some questions. But I now want to talk to you guys about getting a job. And if you got a job and you think I'm full of shit, feel free to leave. But here's how I think you guys should get a job. Now, has anybody ever heard of the Make-A-Wish Foundation? What do they do? There's a picture of it. What is a Make-A-Wish?
They tend to take like the terminally ill kids and they try to make their
Dreams come true. Right.
Yeah.
So the Make-A-Wish Foundation, they gather money and terminally ill children write and say, I will always want to be a fireman, and they'll arrange for the kid to buy a visit fire station. It's really nice work, and you should support that. The number one problem I see with CVs and cover letters and interviews by people of your background is you think that this is an opportunity for you to write a letter to the Make-A-Fucking-Wish Foundation. Nobody cares about your hopes and dreams, guys. Nobody gives a shit. Do not talk about your hopes and dreams in an interview. Do not put it in the cover letter. I don't care. It's not my job. I work for HR. I am not the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Oh, I always wanted to be a consultant and work in London. What does that have to do with me? I don't care. Do not do that. It makes you look indulgent and juvenile. Don't do that. What's the alternative? Excuse my strong language. Tell your parents, okay? Your parents really give a shit about your hopes and dreams. Nobody else does. Maybe your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever friend. Yeah. There's so many different categories. Yes. Nobody cares about your hopes and dreams. Basically, when you're looking to hire someone, you want some combination of energy, intelligence, and integrity. Okay, that's the absolute basic. And if they have the energy and the integrity, but they're dumb, not so good. If they have energy and intelligence, but they have shit integrity, don't hire them. If they have intelligence and integrity, but they're lazy like me, do not hire them. That's what they're looking for. Basically, approach your resume, approach your interview process, approach the cover emails you write as sales documents. And what are you selling? You got to focus on getting them first to interview you and then to hire you. And that means you got to focus on their needs. Nothing will make you a more interesting person than focusing entirely on somebody else. Guys, on a date, just so you know, don't talk about yourself, ask questions about them. Okay? It's similar getting a job. You're dating. It's speed dating. And if you talk about yourself in the context of what you want, you're going to be alone tonight, and you're not going to get a job. So what does that mean? What are the needs of the people reading the email you write or reading your resume? What do they actually want? I'll tell you what they want. First, they just want this, come on, it's Friday afternoon, I can get through the stack of CDs. Make it easy. And that means don't make stupid spelling mistakes. Because the first thing I'm going to do is go in. This is an important job. If you can't be asked to do that right, get out. You're not interested. You're a loser. Second, all right, I'm going to get through this quickly, but I got to find people who add value, fill my needs, my open positions. And then I got to avoid not just fill my immediate needs, but let's avoid jerks and liars and truth stretchers. What does that mean? Oh, and by the way, I do know that software is used to screen resumes and stuff here. And I don't know the algorithm. Figure out how to game the algorithm, but I don't know. First of all, what do they want? They want people with hard skills to do this job. What do I mean by hard skills? Maybe you have knowledge in the industry. Maybe you would, and if you're you learn some software or regions. You guys all have languages. Oh, and by the way, I'll get to that actually. So technically, so at the very least stuff you learned is hey, if they can't be bothered to do this right, should I listen to them? The next thing they want, there's soft skills. Soft skills are really important. They're not soft. Soft is the new hard. Okay? And you guys have them. You have all worked. I assume you've had to do a bunch of group work at Imperial. And has that been the shittiest part of your experience? Yeah, horrible. I became an alcoholic basically during my group. Yeah, I got through it throughout, but you will see over time this makes you incredibly valuable to people who have not had that kind of experience. You're used to working on diverse international teams, and for most of the jobs you're going for, that will have real value. Show that you know that. Okay? If you've led subordinates, that's great. I led a team of 25 people. I led a company, 250 Marines, with the help of very competent staff sergeants and gunnery sergeants. I was just like looking at the map. If you've led peers, that's even better. I led a team of people of the same rank. So hard skills, soft skills, and then can they handle responsibility? Have you run people? Have you run money? Have you delivered projects on time and on budget? All of these things, soft skills, hard skills, the ability to handle responsibility. And then finally, they know you guys are going to jump around and stuff. But finally, they might keep in the back of their mind, could I really see this person fitting in here for the long? But that's like an icing on the cake. Once I've got the hard skills and the soft skills and the ability to handle responsibility. They also, as I said, they want to hire people who fit in, who they like. I know it sounds weird, but really, if you absolutely love orders, spice, forces, or whatever, stay away from me, right? Work is work. Most well-paid jobs are hard. What the interviewer is thinking is, gosh, we spend 60 hours a week at work. Do I want to spend 60 hours with this person? So this is why I encourage you to put hobbies and stuff on your resume. Do you do something else besides work? Now, don't lie. Don't say like, you work in an animal shelter and then people say, what's the favorite dog you saved? You don't have the story. There was this guy who said he was an opera fan, and what a surprise. His interviewer says he's an opera fan too. Asked him what was the last opera he saw. And the guy said, oh, Phantom of the Opera? So, if you do something cool, great. But even if it's normal, like you volunteer, and volunteering is good. But if you serve, say that you serve, if you play chess, whatever. Just what do you do besides work? I want to have a conversation with you. I want to like you. Meanwhile, you're thinking like an intelligence agent, and you're looking at these, maybe the background of the person on the screen interviewing you, maybe their office, and you're saying, oh, your kid plays football, or they have like football on or something. Oh, I play, I know that it's actually called soccer. Don't say that. But, share an interest with them. Be normal. Be a likable person. People hire people that they like. And your knowledge of Michael Porter will not make me like you. Nobody cares. So how do you do? If you ever have to give a speech, get people's attention. Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Stand up and you say, my name is Milo Jones. I am your geopolitics teacher. And what this means to you is, you will have everyone's attention. You say what this means, your name, your position, and then and what this means to you is, and then they go, because they care about themselves. And your cover letter, your cover CV is this, your cover email is the same thing. You quickly say, who are you? Why are you writing? Why does she care? Not who are you? And you're writing because you've always wanted to work in consulting in London or some shit like that. Maybe that's true, but so paragraph 1, I'm in Imperial College, I graduate here. Based on my research with Mr. or my conversation with Ms. Y, I believe I have the soft skills, hard skills, and values required to make a solid contribution to McKinsey as a junior consultant. Am I confident in including my work experience, my education, and my life experience? I know you, by the way, do variations on that. That sounds a little formal, I know. But it shows that you get what they're looking for. You focus like a laser on that. Okay? Then, maybe they don't know who Mr. X is or why, you'd add a little something like Mr. X in the so-and-so office, or my uncle who runs the firm, or whatever. As you see from the attached CV, and then you say a little bit about your hard skills. And then there's a paragraph about your wonderful soft skills that you learned at Imperial. And then maybe, just maybe, the very end, some Make-A-Wish Foundation stuff. I've always thought Goldman Sachs is the most ethical firm, Goldman Sachs, whatever. And then obviously contact. Okay. Again, make their life easy. How many emails do you think they get with a resume attached that says resume, CV 2024? For Christ's sake, put your name. I always send Milo Jones CV. They save it to their desktop. It's just a little thing that shows I'm thinking about their needs, not mine. In general, obviously, if you can, you're right to a specific person. Ideally, you're seeking a specific position, but you're not always that lucky. As I say, cool hobbies, team sports. Depending on the business, team sports can get you hired. People like team sports. In finance in general, stress results. When I was looking for, they're not process people, right? I was all about, literally, I described it as the company, my job title, then key result. I led a team of 250 Marines. Key result. I won top salesman on the East Coast of Dean Letter this year, or whatever. So you're stressing results for finance. For consulting, though, it's more about process and analytical and human skills. Consulting is not about getting the right answer. Consulting is about selling more work. I hate to break that to you. Clients usually know the answer. They just want to cover their ass with consulting work. Every once in a while, you're asked to learn the right answer, but most of the time. And from the consulting company's point of view, they want good sales. Who's going to bring in more consulting work? So, read that carefully, please. Spell check really is your worst enemy. Everybody know what an enemy is versus an enemy?
Typo.
Yeah, be careful. Better yet, have a native speaker of English proofread it. And I say this as the guy who wrote for a summer internship at London Business School. I wrote to Anderson Consulting about how passionate I was about being a summer intern. And I spelled Anderson. Anderson instead of Anderson. I only figured that out when redoing my cover letter to apply for a full-time position. And thank God their HR processes were too inefficient pick that up, and I got a job at Anderson Consulting, okay? But have another set of eyes. And if you have to read something, if you have to proofread it yourself or read somebody else's, here's your trick. Read from the bottom up. Read the last sentence, and then the sentence above it, the sentence above it, and the sentence above it. It will help you see the text. Keep it short. In general, don't tell me I'm a dynamic, energetic person who's done fuck all on my resume. No, if you're a dynamic, energetic person, it's going to show up in your work history. Show me your work history, and I'll figure out whether you have dynamism and energy. Never lie. It will haunt you forever. Do not lie in your resume. Do not stretch. Tell the truth. In general, it's really hard. But during an interview, often you're trying to reload, get ready for the next question. Don't do that. Look them in their eyes. At least, you know the secret to success in Hollywood? Groucho Marx said the secret to success in Hollywood is sincerity. If you can fake that, you've got it made. Okay? Fake a genuine interest in what this person is saying to you. Don't sit there while they're talking to you thinking about, I'm going to answer that last question well. I want it to be the next question I ask. Just try to actually listen to them. Show a sincere interest in them. If you're on an online or a telephone, stand up. Position your computer. Everybody sounds better, looks more confident. Standing up. Adjust it so you're standing up. Oh, and please look behind you and consider the background. My wife does a lot of online interviews, or used to in her job, and you'd see some amazing things in the background of people's, like laundry of a certain type, in the background. Yeah, too much information to work out. You do want to practice for some question. Now, there is a trick question they ask you. So, tell me about yourself. They don't give a shit. Okay? This is not your occasion to say, well, when I was 7, I had a dog named Spot. And you know, Spot was so funny, you could rub his belly and he'd wag his tail. No, you want 45 seconds max that logically ends it. And so I thought McKinsey would be a great place to work. Okay? A coherent story that's quick, that ends with why I'm in your office, why I'm in this interview. A coherent story that focuses finally on the logical reason why they should keep talking to you. I don't know if people still do the most difficult decision and stuff, but don't do crap like, well, my worst quality is sometimes I work too hard. I'm too diligent. Okay, that's so obviously bullshit. It's bad. I tell you my story. I have a short temper, but when I was a lieutenant, I once publicly lost my temper as a sergeant in front of the platoon, his platoon. And it was so bad that I later called muster and I apologized publicly to that sergeant in front of that platoon. And I've now learned that I only praise in public and criticize in private. It was a real lesson for me. Compelling as hell, right? I have this weakness, and I've learned, I've overcome it. Don't ask about money. If they talk about money, great, and have a figure in mind ready to name. If you're like me, pick the amount you want and add 15%, 15 to 20%. Go for the high end. Don't be crazy, but go ahead and ask for the high end. It's okay. Never ask how you did in an interview. If you really die as you walk out, you can say, if they haven't already mentioned it, can you tell me what the next step might be? Which is usually, we'll be in touch. But in general, please, you guys are all smart, but it doesn't matter. Life is not an intelligence test. Life is a character test. Character eats intelligence for breakfast every time. Please remember that. As I've said, you can control one thing for sure, that's your attitude to events. You will have many jobs after Imperial. Life is a marathon, not a sprint. Remove pressure from yourself. The job you get next is not going to define your life. It's just your first job after Imperial. I know, and that also speaks to picking, you can pick a place or you can pick an industry. But if you pick a place and an industry, that is a recipe for hanging yourself, okay? Because you're going to say, I want to be in London and I want to be a banker. You can apply to all the banks in London, they're going to say no, and you're going to hang yourself. Don't do that. Instead, say, I want to stay in London. I think I want to be a banker. But if banking doesn't work out, I'll also consider asset management or something related. Or I really want to be a banker. You start looking in London, but if London doesn't work out, I'm prepared to go to Dublin. Be kind to yourself. Give yourself some breaks. Don't be too absolute. Aim high, but also give yourself a break. Don't pick up. Make sure your career is your career. Nietzsche was always accused of being inconsistent. And he said that's not true. I have a rule of granite. And the rule of granite is become who you are. As I said yesterday, there's only going to be one you. Go ahead and be that person. And don't try to compete through imitation. Be or become who you are. I also think if you really think you'll be happy lying on a beach, for God's sake, go lie on a beach. Now, quit. Don't take a job where you're dreaming of retirement. Do a job you actually like. That's why I teach. I like teaching. If I didn't like teaching, I wouldn't do it. My mentor shows up for Easter dinner with my mother at age 78. My mother never met him. And she says, so Mr. Goddard, you're retired? And he says, Mr. Jones, I work 365 days a year, 7 days a week. But I only work an hour or two a day. Like what I do. That's the life you want to build. Like what you do. Really enjoy it. And by the way, that also means stress is healthy. You guys are all like down. Stress is bad. No, stress is fuel. Stress is good. Stress will make you excellent. Jump out of some planes. Do some cool stuff. But avoiding stress is a recipe to be a loser. Truly, happiness does not come from money. Happiness comes from making constructive contributions to important causes. That's what's worth money. And if you're like me, you're a nice neutral analyst, but Solon had a very cool law. In the event of civil war in Africa, you didn't lose your, after the war, you didn't lose your citizenship if you were on the opposite side. The only people who lost their citizenship were those assholes who didn't pick a side. I live by Solon rules. You might be on the wrong side, but at least you got an opinion. The people you really shouldn't trust, the people in the event of a civil war or a dispute are like, I don't know, I'm just here to make money, man. Screw that. Thank you all very much. Connect on LinkedIn. Your grades don't matter. They will not determine your life. I thank you all. It's 5 to 5 on a Friday night. And truly, thank you all very much. And keep in touch. Should you so choose. I know you didn't necessarily think you'd be searching for weapons of mass destruction.